This is not a crisis. This is not a crisis. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Michael, what are you talking about? Have you looked at the news recently? Have you seen what's going on? Have you seen all the bad things that are happening right now in the world and in this country and ecologically? Yes, I know. But this is not a crisis. I know that bad things are happening. I know that things are changing, mostly for the worse. Part of what's going on is that the current regime is trying to manufacture a crisis. They're trying to say that there's a crisis here and a crisis there and a crisis everywhere. And then they think the rationale to suspend individual rights, to suspend due process, to ignore rules and regulations, to throw all that aside and impose authoritarian rule. So it's easy for us to get caught up in that crisis mentality, that crisis thinking. And once we do, our adrenaline starts going, we start to feel fear, we feel rage, we feel anger, and our time frame shrinks down. We're no longer thinking long term, we're thinking in the next hour, the next few days, like we're just thinking about what's happening right now, the current crisis. But as you know, this authoritarian regime is flooding the zone. They're trying to break everything everywhere all at once. And so if we're in this crisis mode, we're going to get overwhelmed and burnt out really quickly. So how do we think about this? How do we think about bad things happening, big things happening? And if it's not a crisis, what is it? How can we think about this? If we don't think about short term, the immediate thing, then what do we think about? How do we hold this? What's our frame for dealing with the current situation? That's what this episode of Resilience in Dark Times is all about. We're going to look at the classic marshmallow test. You might be familiar with that. To think in terms of current self and future self. We're going to get critiques of that test, and we're going to come up with a way for you to look at what's happening right now in a way that's empowering for you and gives you some sense of direction. And then we'll end with a story. We'll end with a story based on that view of where we're at. Today, in Resilience in Dark Times, this is not a crisis. You're listening to Resilience in Dark Times. I'm your companion and guide, Michael Glavin. Whatever brought you here, I'm glad you found us. This is a space for honest conversation, practical strategies, and the kind of hope that comes from facing reality together. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome. I am so glad you're back here with me together, and we're sitting where we are right now and looking at the world and looking at our situation and trying to make the best of it and trying to make this world a little bit better place and a better place for you and for the people and the creatures you care about. So today, in that effort, we're going to try to step out of that crisis mentality and step into a more helpful framework. In order to do that, we're going to first look at the classic marshmallow test. Now, this was an experiment designed by Walter Mischel and his colleagues at Stanford University. So what they did is they invited preschool students to come into a room and sit down at a desk. And on the desk was their favorite treat, usually a marshmallow. So the kids sitting there, marshmallow on the desk, and someone in a lab coat sitting there, and that person explains to them, okay, you can eat this marshmallow right now or your favorite candy, but if you wait 15 minutes, you'll get another one. So instead of one marshmallow, you'll have two marshmallows. And these kids were on camera, and then the researcher left the room. And you can go on YouTube and see these kids struggling with this decision. Do I sit here and wait 15 minutes to get twice as much treat? Or do I just eat this treat right now? And the kids are adorable. They're squirming and struggling and fidgeting and covering their eyes and not looking at the treat and trying to hold on for the 15 minutes. For a kid, that's a long time. So some of the kids broke down, just ate the treat. Some waited, 5 or 10 minutes and then broke down and ate the treat. And some made it to the 15 minutes. And they were rewarded with a second treat. So they got 2 treats. And then the researchers tracked these kids, and so the ones who could wait the 15 minutes versus the ones who couldn't. And they found the kids who could wait went on to have better academic performance, higher SAT scores. They got along better socially. They were more successful in life. And the kids who couldn't control their impulses and ate the treat right away didn't do as well. And one way to look at this is think of it in terms of the present day self versus the future self. And who has a priority? Who's more important in that situation? So if you can wait the 15 minutes, your present day self is suffering, not having that treat, trying to resist the urge to eat the treat. But you're doing that so your future self could have 2 treats. So you're doing this short-term sacrifice for this long-term gain, as opposed to eating the treat now where you get the reward, you get the benefit, but your future self doesn't get any treats. And the thought is that the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that can deal with the impulse control and the long-term thinking to allow the executive functioning, to allow the kid to make these good decisions for short-term sacrifice for long-term gain. And we can think about our own lives. And sometimes we just eat that marshmallow, and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we put in the work, we put in the sacrifice for our future self so we can enjoy more or live better in the future. We sacrifice our current situation in order to get that better outcome. And this is part of development. This is part of people going through their teen years where this is really difficult, and even early 20s. It's hard to put in the work and do the sacrifice now so that my future self can be better, can be in a better situation. And now for me, that was difficult. It was more difficult in my teen years, early 20s, but then by my mid to really late 20s, I really started to jam on this. I started to really do the self-sacrifice in the moment so my future self could live a better life and have more security and have more than I did at that current moment. So, I went to computer programming, and I worked for a large corporation, and they actually had a pension program, if you can imagine it anymore. But to get that pension, you had to be there for 5 years. And they also had a 401k matching program. So if you put in money, so if you sacrificed your current situation and live more frugally in the current situation, and you put into the 401k, they would match it. But that would only vest after 5 years. So you had to be employed at this corporation for more than 5 years to get these benefits. And that wasn't easy with all rounds of layoffs and cutbacks and stuff. But I was able to do that. I was able to really invest and work hard and show up every day and do really long nights and sometimes all night long doing coding and putting in the money to the 401k so that in 5 years it could vest. And I did, and I made it, and I got there. And that's kind of how I lived my life. From my late 20s on, I was really good at current sacrifice for future gain. And this is what I teach my kids, is these values of doing the hard thing now so that your future self could benefit from it later. So learning an instrument, for instance, you put in the hard work and the practice, and sometimes it's tedious and it's boring and you don't want to do it. But if you do it, if you invest in learning that instrument, then the joy you get from being able to play a musical instrument, play with friends, or play in front of an audience, or just play to the stereo, whatever, that joy is amazing. Or physical activity, putting in the hard work of training, learning how to do a sport, becoming physically fit, then your future self gets to be good at a sport and play a game with other people and to run and have this health and this energy and this vitality. And that's really a formula for success and for happiness and well-being. And then the opposite of that is the addictions. Like, we have a very addictive society, and it's easy to fall into that because it's an inversion. It's a short-term benefit, short-term feeling of pleasure or contentment or whatever, excitement. But then it takes something from the long term. So you can stay out late with your friends and have a nice fun time drinking, but then the next day, you got a hangover, life doesn't feel so great. This happens in drug use all the time. You get that short-term rush or that short-term good feeling, but then when you come out of it, you're worse off than you were when you started. That's the same thing with the gambling, or the same thing of video games. Like, if you're stressed out, I have so much to do, so I'm going to go play these video games. Okay, I'm playing video games, so now I'm not feeling stressed out. Right. But when you're done with the video games, you still have all that stuff you need to do, and you have less time to do it and less energy because you just spent all this time playing your video games. And so that can kick into the cycle of addiction, where you're sacrificing your long-term happiness for the short term. And addiction is more complicated than that. There's shame involved and all sorts of things, but I just want to focus on that present self, future self. And where's the priority? Who are you prioritizing? Your current self or your future self? And so it's generally a good idea to prioritize your future self, except in a crisis. In a crisis, you need to focus on your present day self. And sometimes that means you need to sacrifice some of your future self in the present moment. I was doing this very well, and then the pandemic hit. And so in the pandemic, in those early days, we didn't know what was going on, and there was no vaccine. We didn't know how dangerous the virus was. It was mutating. We didn't know if it was going to mutate worse and worse and become super deadly. It was deadly, but mostly for young kids and for older people with pre-existing conditions. And it was a really scary time. And I remember thinking at the time, that people were saying, well, it's going to last 2 weeks. And I was pessimistic. I was like, no, it's going to be much longer than 2 weeks. I think it's going to be like 4 or 6 weeks. I wish it was only 6 weeks. But the future was uncertain, and the future was unpredictable. We didn't know what was happening. And I wanted to protect myself and my wife and my kids, but I figured we were healthy enough. We were going to be okay unless there was some drastic mutation. But my mom at the time had leukemia, and so she had no immune system. So if she got COVID, that could be it, right? And I wanted to stay in touch with her. I wanted to stay in contact with her. And so I was really concerned that I didn't want us to get it and then give it to her accidentally. I was really anxious and really concerned about the contact points with other people. And one of those contact points, we needed to get food. And we were fortunate enough to be able to afford deliveries. So we got a delivery service. At the time, there's apps popping up for people to do shopping for you and then deliver the groceries. And so we were able to do that. But then we had all these groceries. And at that time, we didn't know how COVID was being spread. And so the recommendation was that you wiped everything down with antiseptic. And so I remember sitting on my kitchen floor, grocery bags everywhere. And there's so many plastic bags. Like, normally we do our own shopping. We bring our own bags and we reuse the bags. But this, there was one item in each shopping bag and plastic bag. And so there were like 30 or 40 plastic bags. And I was taking one item at a time out of the bag and wiping it down with these Sani wipes, antiseptic towels. And so just imagining like because you can't see where the virus is, if there is a virus there. So you have to imagine it to be everywhere. And imagine it getting on your hands and then washing your hands. And then it was so mentally exhausting going through that. I cut down how much I was eating by 2/3. I was eating 1/3 of what I normally ate because I thought, okay, if I eat less, then we will need less food. And so then we will need to make contact with the outside world less often, which will keep us safer. So I really cut down on eating. And in the first few weeks, I wound up losing 15 pounds, which was really not healthy. But it indicated my level of anxiety and the crisis mode situation that I was in. And after that, things stabilized a bit and we got a vaccine and things normalized a little bit. And we were seeing my mom outside. We got these electric blankets during the winter, so we could all sit outside with electric blankets and these fires going, and we could see her and try to be safe at the same time. But I was still in this crisis mindset. And so once we got a vaccine, I was starting to eat again. And so I put the 15 pounds back on, and then I kept going. The 4 weeks went to 6 weeks, went to 2 months, went to 6 months, went to a year, went to over a year. And it was around the 1.5, 2 year mark that I went back to the doctor and I just got tested. And oh my goodness, what a wake up call. My cholesterol was off the charts. My weight was way up. My blood pressure was borderline high. My blood sugar was borderline high, pre-diabetic range. All the red lights on the dashboard were flashing. This is not sustainable. And it hit me that what I had been doing the last 1.5, 2 years was I inverted who had the priority between my present day self and my future self. And what I was doing was I was sacrificing my future self to comfort my present day self. Because I thought of this as a crisis, I was making exceptions. I was saying it's okay to have a glass of wine every night after dinner. It's okay to have some ice cream. It's okay to eat comfort food. I wasn't going to the gym. And so I was sacrificing my future self and my future self's health and vitality and well-being for my present day self. I was eating that marshmallow. I was not helping out my future self at all. I was grabbing that marshmallow and shoving it in my face as quickly as I could. Well, it turns out that in 2018, they did the marshmallow test again, but this time they did it with a much larger population and a much more diverse population. And they found some things that were a little bit different than the original authors of the study. They realized that socioeconomic factors explained much of the variation in the kids' ability to wait. So things like family income, parental education, and household stability really impacted whether the kids would take that marshmallow right now or wait to the future. And once these factors were controlled for, the link between waiting longer and later life outcomes was much smaller. So in other words, children from a stable, predictable environment find it easier to delay gratification. So if your world feels unpredictable or scarce, taking the reward right now makes sense. I realized during the pandemic, I was living in what I took to be an unstable, unpredictable world. So I was taking that marshmallow now. I was just like, I'm just going to soothe myself right now, take this right now. So if kids are in a household, if they have parents who could be really well-intentioned, well-meaning, and might make a promise, but they don't have the economic backing to make that promise come true, then the kids learn, oh, that future promise of, I know this person in the lab coat says I will get 2 marshmallows, but will I really get 2 marshmallows? Because often my experience is that doesn't happen, that life is chaotic, unpredictable, promises are made and broken. through no fault of my parents, but because of the circumstances that we are in. So it strategically makes sense for me to take what I can right now. In a chaotic environment, taking the marshmallow now makes sense over something in the future that may never come. That's what I was doing. I was taking the marshmallow right now because I didn't know about the future. I was like, well, I don't know about that future self, but right now I'm distressed. I'm going to have that ice cream. I'm going to have that glass of wine. I'm going to do whatever I need to do to comfort myself because we're in a crisis, because this is a crisis. And so it's temporary. So I'm making an exception. Right now, I'm going to comfort myself instead of doing what is good for me long term because I'm in a crisis, because it's temporary. But was it temporary? No, it was not temporary. It went on for months and months and months, and it's still here. The virus is still here. There was no end to the pandemic. There's no declaration and, a bell was rung that, the pandemic is over. We've just adjusted to it. It's become what they call an endemic. COVID is here. We get our vaccines. We hope not to get it. And we try to live our lives the best we can. And those of us who are immunocompromised have to wear masks. And those of us who are sensitive to those people try to mask up in social situations if they're going to be present. My mistake during the pandemic was this mismatch between what was actually happening and what I thought was happening. I thought we were in a crisis, which a crisis is a short-term thing. A crisis lasts an hour, right? You can have a crisis for a few minutes. You can have a crisis for an hour. You might have a crisis for a day. Like if there's a flood or something, maybe you have a crisis for a day or a few days. But a crisis doesn't go on for weeks and months and years. When that's the situation, the crisis mentality is a form of denial, or can be a form of denial. It keeps you from seeing the current situation, what's really happening. And so I was fooling myself thinking this was a crisis, thinking that somehow we're going to go back to some pre-pandemic state and that this was all temporary. And since it was temporary, I could make these exceptions for myself. But I was wrong. I should have seen that as the new reality and adapt to the new reality in a way that was sustainable for me, in a way that didn't sacrifice my health and well-being in the future. So after I saw those tests and after I had that wake-up call and I realized that my thinking about my current situation was way out of whack with what was actually happening, then I made an adjustment. Then I incorporated more exercise. I ate healthier, and thankful to say that now all my numbers took about a year and a half to get all my numbers back in line. And I was able to do that because I gave up that crisis mentality, that crisis mindset. Now our society is having this collective marshmallow test. What do we do individually? What do we do collectively? Are we in a crisis? Our dear leader keeps saying there's a crisis, and that's why he thinks he's allowed to do all these terrible things and impose his will on everyone else. We have another part of the political establishment that says, oh, this is all just temporary. We just need to go back. This is like a fever and it's going to break and then everything will be fine again. We'll just go back to the way things were. Well, the way things weren't great. They were not working for the majority of people. Most of the people are struggling. And then we have the billionaires, and they've made up their minds, if you see what their actions are. You have corporations, you have the 1%, and the current regime and the current billionaires are grabbing those marshmallows and they're taking your marshmallows and they're taking everyone's marshmallows. It's not just one person that's doing this. It's a whole political party that's radical. It's a radical right authoritarian party that's supporting what's happening, that's enabling what's happening, that's implementing what's happening. We have a Supreme Court that's participating in what's happening. And not only that, there are billionaires backing this and profiting from what's happening. And we have the other party that just wants to go back to the way things were before, as if things were great for everyone before then. So with the previous election, instead of thinking of it as temporary, I always thought of it as 4+ years. We need to endure 4+ years. And if it's shorter than that, great. But I don't want to think about this as a crisis, as a temporary thing, because I think that leads to burnout, that leads to overwhelm, that leads to short-term thinking, that leads to panicking. We need to get out of crisis mentality. We need to think of the long term. So if this is not a crisis, then what is it? I think this is a turning point. We don't know what the future holds. We can see what the billionaires want. We can see what the radical right wants. They want an authoritarian regime. They want corruption. They don't want any rights. They don't want any democracy. They want a fortress America, and they want an America as an internment camp. They think that they're going to be safe in their bunkers or on Mars or whatever their plan is. But I want something else. I want a world that's ecological, a world that's thoroughly democratic, and a world that's egalitarian. And I don't know which way it's going to go, but I think we're at a turning point. If we're looking at things ecologically, it's a 25+ year project we're talking about. Probably 100 years to restore the planet, maybe longer. If we're looking at politically, it's at least a decade struggle that we're looking at. What I like about this notion of turning point is because it makes everything important. Like what we're doing right now is important, individually and collectively. We need to not only fight against the rise of authoritarianism and the destruction of the planet, we need to create something. We need to create what we want. We need to create structures that will outlive us. We need to restore ecological systems that we won't see the benefit of. The notion of a turning point brings both the urgency of the now and doing what we need to do now, but also long-term thinking and sustainability. It's not about the next month. It's not about the next election cycle. It's not about going all in for a few days or a few months even, or even for a year. We need to take care of ourselves. We need to take care of each other because this is long-term. This is a long-term struggle. And I really think it helps to link this struggle up with history and historical struggles. And that we didn't start this. There are people who come before us who have given us a world where this is possible to keep fighting and keep fighting for justice and to restore the planet because our forebears were able to get us this far despite all the struggles that they had, and that we need to do this for future generations, that what we do now matters. This is a turning point. This is not a transition. Maybe it's a transition, like in retrospect, we'll see history will look at, oh yeah, that was a transition to authoritarian rule, or that was a transition to democratic socialism throughout the planet. Who knows? A Star Trek society. I don't know. You don't know. So transition doesn't help right now. Turning point. This is a turning point. We will create the future. Everyone on the planet right now will create the future. What that future will be hangs in the balance. That's what it's all about. And that's not a short-term thing. That's a long-term struggle. So let's go back to the marshmallow test. Do we live in a chaotic, unpredictable world where we need to grab what we can right now? Or do we live in a stable world where if we play by the rules, we will be rewarded in some future state? I don't think we're in the first state right now yet, but that other state, that predictable, state where there's pensions and you just join the corporation and everything will be fine as long as you're a white male, straight white male. That world is gone. So what situation are we in? I think we're in the situation of trying to create what kind of world we want to live in. Who gets the marshmallows? I think we live in a world where what test we're in doubt. We get to create the conditions for future generations. And what kind of world do they live in? Do they live in the world where they just need to get what they can because the future is grim? So just enjoy what you have right now and grab what you can right now. A Mad Max kind of world. Or do they live in a world that's more stable, more fair, more just, more egalitarian, ecological, democratic? We don't know yet. Let me read you a story that talks about sort of present day self and future self. This is a Jewish story from the Talmud. It's about a man named Honi, the circle maker. One day, Honi was walking along his path when he saw a man planting a carob tree. Curious, Honi asked the man, "This tree, how long will it take for it to bear fruit?" And the man responded dutifully and honestly, 70 years. Honi was appalled. 70 years? That's a really long time to grow a tree. Why would anyone plant a tree that wasn't even going to bear fruit in their lifetime? When Honi asked the planter this question, the man simply responded, "My grandparents planted a carob tree so that I would be able to reap its fruit. Now I shall do the same for my grandchildren." Honi, perplexed by the man's perspective on the future, did what anyone would do after such a confusing conversation. He sat down for a nice meal, and they settled in for a quick nap. But little did Honi know his quick nap morphed into a 70-year deep sleep. When he woke up, he saw a young man plucking the fruit from a fully grown carob tree. He rubbed his eyes and sauntered over to the man. "Hey," he said, "did you plant this tree?" And the man shook his head. He said, "My grandfather planted this tree for me, knowing that 70 years later it would grow into something that I could cherish and use." I really love that story. The temptation for all of us is to take what we can right now, and that's what our society is telling us. Like, have fun. Our consumerist society is all about the moment. Like consume, 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 pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. Use up everything right now, especially when there's a crisis and you don't know the future and what's going to happen. But it's really important to break out of that. And it can be hard to break out of that. But that's why I love this story that reminds us to step outside of our current situation and think about the future. Imagine the kind of world where we want our grandchildren and future generations to, what kind of world do we want them to live in? If we want them to have abundance, we want them to have nature, we want them to have democracy, we want them to have health care, equality, rights, then we need to make the sacrifices now in order to try to ensure that to happen. And to do that, we need to do that in a sustaining way, because it's not going to be done in a day. We need to restore the planet. We need to build the democratic structures, the practices, the ways to redistribute wealth in order to pass them on to future generations. This is a turning point. This is not a crisis. This is a turning point. What we do now determines what future generations will be able to experience. It's so important. And what we do now needs to be sustainable, because it's not going to take a month or a year or a couple of years. It's not about the next election cycle. It's about 10 years, 20 years, 25, 50 years, 100 years. It needs to be an ongoing effort to create the future that we want to see. We're in a time of great upheaval and uncertainty. Karl Marx, during the Industrial Revolution, was in a similar time period where feudalism was giving way to capitalism. And he wrote, "All fixed, fast-frozen relations, with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinion, are swept away. All new-formed ones become antiquated before they can ossify. All that is solid melts into air. All that is holy is profaned. And man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life and his relations with his kind. Marx was writing at the time of the dissolution of the feudal state and the rise of industrialism. Everything was in change. Everything was in flux. We are in a similar time now. We are at the turning point. We don't know what the future holds, but all of us collectively will determine that outcome. This is not a crisis. This is a turning point. So your action item for today is to do one thing that will support someone else's future self. Okay? And it could be a person or it could be a creature. So an easy thing is planting a tree. But you can also, donate to, we have in Chicago, free pantries where you can go and drop off food. So if you go and drop off some yummy food, then you can imagine some person going to the pantry and finding that food and being grateful for that. So you're helping that person in the future. Do whatever you think will help someone in the future, their future self. And it can be, a day in the future or a month in the future or 40 or 50 years in the future. And then if you're on Substack, come and post what you did and we'll have a discussion about it. If you're not, you can go to resilienceInDarkTimes.com and just sign up there, and then you'll be part of the Substack community. All right, that's it for now. See you next week. That's all for this episode of Resilience in Dark Times. Your action items? First, try one strategy we discussed. Second, connect with one person about these issues. Breaking isolation is resistance. And third, leave us a review to help others find this community. For show notes and resources, visit resiliencindarktimes.com. I'm Michael Glavin, reminding you that your resilience is revolutionary. See you next episode.